The story of India's freedom struggle is incomplete without the mention of Shaheed-e-Azam Sardar Bhagat Singh. On 23rd of March 1931, a young Bhagat Singh, who was just 23 at the time, marched to the gallows with a smile on his face along with his allies Sukhdev and Rajguru. The three happily sacrificed their lives for the country. While he gave up his life, Bhagat Singh's revolutionary ideology became immortal. Even though the Indian government has not given him the status of a martyr till now, his supreme sacrifice at a young age made Bhagat Singh Shaheed-e-Azam, the supreme martyr in the hearts and minds of everyone in India. It is very important for the present generation to know how Bhagat Singh became such a freedom fighter who inspired not only the country but also generations abroad. Even now, thousands follow his thoughts and ideology across the world. Shaheed-e-Azam Bhagat Singh, who shook the roots of the British Empire, was born in Layalpur, now Pakistan, on September 28, 1907. Born into a politically active family, Bhagat Singh had patriotism in his blood. His grandfather Arjun Singh was associated with the Hindu reformist group Arya Samaj. His father Sardar Kishan Singh and uncle Sardar Ajit Singh were members of the Ghadar party, which was active in India's freedom struggle. There were three things that motivated Bhagat Singh to dedicate his life to the struggle for independence. First was the Jallianwala Bagh massacre, in which hundreds of unarmed people were shot dead by the British. At the age of 12, Bhagat Singh himself went there and fetched the soil from the place. Second, Bhagat Singh was impressed with Kartar Singh Saraba, an active young leader of the Ghadar movement. Bhagat was impressed how a 19-year-old who had travelled far and wide was working for the welfare of his countrymen. And the third and the most important guiding light for Bhagat Singh was Sri Guru Granth Sahib.
कि बल हुआ बंधन छूटे सब कुछ हो तो पाए नानक तुमरे हाथ में तुम ही होए सहाय कि किसी होर तो सहारा ना लभो जे तुसी बलवान हो तुसी अपना सहारा हो तुसी अपना मतलब जिहड़ा है आप काम कर सकते हो। भगत सिंह कहते कि इहदा मतलब है कि उहदा मूल मंत्र यह है कि जे असी अपनियां कमज़ोरियां नूं दूर करके बलवान बणीए और बलवान बनने का मतलब है सरीरक बल पहली है जिहड़ा सेहत नाल जुड़िया होया फिर उस तो बाद तुहाडा विचारां दा बल फिर जदे तुसीं विचार ने तुहाडे ते फिर तुहाडा इरादा मजबूत हुंदा है।
Bhagat Singh was fond of reading books. He read and understood how the War of Independence should be fought. In 1921, De Valera of Ireland managed to get the Dominion status with the help of other patriots. The first book that Bhagat Singh translated was My Fight for Irish Freedom by Dan Breen. He translated this book to Hindi so that everyone could read it and receive guidance from it. He himself learnt a lot from it. The core ideology of Bhagat Singh was that while a body can be killed, thoughts remain immortal. Therefore, he raised a slogan for the masses, "Down with imperialism and long live the revolution." While defining imperialism, Bhagat Singh said that until the time foreign powers were looting India, its people will always be bereft of happiness. Bhagat Singh wrote a very moving thing about the revolution.
इनकलाब जिहड़ा ना यह हिंसा का मामला नहीं है। इनकलाब जिहड़ा है यह मार धाड़ का मसला नहीं। इनकलाब मनुखां दे कतलेआम का मसला नहीं। इनकलाब एक कसीदाकारी है, एक कविता, एक गज़ल वर्गी गल, एक नवी कहानी, एक नवे समाज नूं जन्म देना।
Two most important events that played a major role in Bhagat Singh's life were British officer John Saunders' murder and assembly bombing. Let's talk about the first one. In 1928, a 7-member panel called Simon Commission came to India to review the constitutional reforms in the country. Plainly speaking, they were in India to review the amendments of British policies for Indians. This was opposed all over India as not a single Indian was named in the panel. On October 30, 1928, the Simon Commission came to Lahore and was met by a peaceful protest led by Lala Lajpat Rai. The slogans "Simon Go Back" were hurled at the group. The British authorities clamped down the agitation by violent lathi charge, injuring many, including Lala Lajpat Rai. Unfortunately, he succumbed to his injuries and passed away. The youth of Bharat Naujawan Sabha and Socialist Republican Army decided to avenge Lalaji's death. They plotted to assassinate James Scott, who ordered the lathi charge at the peaceful protesters. However, the plan backfired as they killed John Saunders, an assistant superintendent of the police. Soon after, the HSRA put up notices acknowledging the assassination. The posters read, "J.P. Saunders is dead. Lala Lajpat Rai is avenged. In this man has died an agent of the British authority in India. Sorry for the bloodshed of the human being, but the sacrifice of individuals at the altar of revolution is inevitable."
ਸਾਂਡਰਸ ਦਾ ਮਰਡਰ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਉਸੇ ਰਾਤ ਭਗਤ ਸਿੰਘ ਹੋਣੀ ਲਾਹੌਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੱਡੀ ਗਿਣਤੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਰਾਤ ਨੂੰ ਦੀਵਾਰਾਂ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਪੋਸਟਰ ਲਾਉਂਦੇ ਨੇ, ਉਹ ਤੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਸਾਥੀ। ਉਹਨਾਂ ਪੋਸਟਰਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇਹ ਲਿਖਿਆ ਹੋਇਆ ਕਿ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਮਨੁੱਖੀ ਜਾਨ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਬੇਹੱਦ ਦੁੱਖ ਹੈ, ਅਸੀਂ ਮਨੁੱਖੀ ਜ਼ਿੰਦਗੀ ਨੂੰ ਬੇਹੱਦ ਪਿਆਰ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ, ਇਹ ਲਹੂ ਡੁੱਲਣ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਅਫਸੋਸ ਹੈ ਤੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਸਮਾਜ ਬਦਲਣਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਹਾਂ। ਕੋਈ ਵਿਅਕਤੀਆਂ ਦੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਕੋਈ ਕਾਤਲਾਂ ਦਾ ਟੋਲਾ ਇਸ ਕਿਸਮ ਦੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈ। ਪਰ ਨਾਲ ਅੱਗੇ ਜਾ ਕੇ ਲਿਖਦੇ ਨੇ, ਪਰ ਕੀ ਕਰੀਏ, ਆਜ਼ਾਦੀ ਦੀ ਬੇਦੀ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਕਈ ਵਾਰੀ ਇਸ ਕਿਸਮ ਦੀਆਂ ਘਟਨਾਵਾਂ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਹਰਡਲ ਨੇ, ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਰੁਕਾਵਟਾਂ ਨੇ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਅੱਗੇ ਲੰਘਣ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਇਸ ਦੀਆਂ ਕਰਨੀਆਂ ਪੈਂਦੀਆਂ ਨੇ। ਔਰ ਕਮਾਲ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਇਹ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਭਗਤ ਸਿੰਘ ਦੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਜੇਲ੍ਹ ਡਾਇਰੀ ਆ ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜ਼ਿਕਰ ਆਉਂਦੇ ਨੇ ਕਿ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਸਾਰੇ ਜੀਵਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਪੂਰੇ ਦੇ ਪੂਰੇ 23 ਸਾਲ ਦੀ ਉਮਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜ਼ਿੰਦਗੀ 'ਚ ਇੱਕ ਵਾਰੀ ਸਿਰਫ ਤੇ ਸਿਰਫ ਇੱਕ ਗੋਲੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਚਲਾਈ ਹੈ।
The second major incident in Bhagat Singh's life was the bombing of the Central Assembly on April 8, 1929. Guided by the history then, Bhagat Singh had read that during the French Revolution, explosions were carried out to rattle the government and send across the message. That is why Batukeshwar Dutt and Bhagat Singh planned to throw a bomb in the Central Assembly. Both revolutionaries threw 2 bombs in the empty space inside the assembly and also hurled leaflets which read, "It takes a loud noise to make the deaf hear." They were just sound bombs that did not cause any loss of life, but certainly shook the British officials. Along with the bombs, Bhagat Singh and Dutt signed off with "Inqilab Zindabad" or "Long live the revolution." They stood their ground and did not resist arrest. Because there were no casualties in the assembly bombing, the two were sentenced to life imprisonment. But the British intended to hang Bhagat Singh by any means. So they also reopened the investigation in Saunders' murder case, and on October 7, 1930, on the basis of all evidence, the tribunal concluded that Bhagat Singh, Sukhdev and Rajguru were involved in Saunders' murder and sentenced the 3 to death. At first, the British finalized March 31 as the date of execution. Around the date, the British officials assumed young men would be busy with examinations and farmers with harvesting. But in spite of this, there was widespread opposition to Bhagat Singh's execution in the region. Seeing the growing protests, the British decided to hang them on March 24 instead. But the news reached the family, and on 23rd evening, a huge crowd gathered outside the Lahore Jail. Breaking all protocols, the 3 revolutionaries were hanged on the evening of March 23. Instead of handing over the bodies of the martyrs to their families, the British took them by managing to break the rear wall of the jail. They then burned them in Hussainiwala and dumped the bodies in Sutlej.
ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਜੇਲ੍ਹ ਮੈਨੂਅਲ ਨੂੰ ਵੀ ਵਾਇਓਲੇਟ ਕਰਕੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਪੂਰੀ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਔਰ ਐਲਾਨ ਹੋਰ ਕੀਤਾ ਗਿਆ। ਔਰ 23 ਮਾਰਚ 1931 ਦੀ ਸ਼ਾਮ ਨੂੰ, ਜਦੋਂ ਕਿ ਅਕਸਰ ਪੂਰੀ ਦੁਨੀਆ ਦੇ ਇੱਕ ਪ੍ਰੋਟੋਕੋਲ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਅਰਲੀ ਇਨ ਦਾ ਮਾਰਨਿੰਗ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਫਾਂਸੀ ਲਗਾਇਆ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਹੁੰਦਾ, ਤਾਂ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਵੀ ਉਲੰਘ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਗਿਆ। ਇਹ ਸਾਰੇ ਐਪੀਸੋਡ
Shaheed-e-Azam Bhagat Singh is revered not only in India but also in Pakistan. The Lahore-based Bhagat Singh Memorial Foundation is demanding national martyr status for the revolutionary.